Before we start, I've worked in tech long enough to see this pattern play out more times than I care to count. This isn't just a story for engagement. It's built from real observations, real consequences, real people who thought they were untouchable. All names and companies have been changed. Let's get into it. I knew something had shifted when Samuel Knight walked into the Monday morning stand-up with his sleeves rolled up like he was about to perform surgery, not discuss sprint velocity. He had this look, the kind that says, "I've made a decision and you're going to love pretending to agree with it." He didn't even wait for the Scrum Master to finish talking about blockers before he cut in. "We need to talk about technical debt," he announced, eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for field mice. "Specifically, the infrastructure Hannah's been maintaining. It's time we modernize." Hannah. That's me. And modernize is corporate speak for replace you with something shinier that doesn't ask for raises. But that moment wasn't the beginning. The real beginning was 7 months earlier, when they brought Samuel Knight in as VP of Engineering. Fresh from some Series C startup in Austin where everyone wore Allbirds and talked about velocity optimization like it was a religion. His first all-hands presentation had a slide that just said, "Move fast" in 80-point font. No context. Just those 2 words and a stock photo of a cheetah. I sat in the back of that meeting, arms crossed, watching him gesture at graphs about agile transformation and cloud-native architecture. He mentioned machine learning 4 times in 12 minutes. I counted. What he didn't mention was Cascade, the custom financial reconciliation system I'd built from scratch 3 years ago when our entire accounting pipeline was held together with Excel macros and prayer. The system that processed $340 million in transactions last quarter without a single discrepancy. The system that had saved the company from 2 separate audit nightmares and 1 potential SEC investigation. He didn't ask me about Cascade's architecture. Didn't ask why we'd never had a data breach under my watch. Didn't ask how we maintained 99.97% uptime during the market volatility of 2023 when half our competitors were bleeding client trust. He just made a dismissive gesture when someone mentioned legacy systems, and said we needed to shed the old skin to grow. I wrote that phrase down in my notebook, right under the little doodle I'd made of his perfectly sculpted beard. And I waited. Hey, real quick before I keep going. Most people watch stories like this without subscribing. It genuinely helps our small team continue creating content like this. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about corporate karma. Thank you. Samuel didn't know what he didn't know. And nobody at Crestfield Financial stopped him because the board was desperate for innovation. After our previous VP had left under mysterious circumstances involving a vendor kickback scheme. Because nobody wanted to argue with the guy who'd just taken a startup from zero to exit in 18 months. Because his confidence was so absolute it felt rude to question it. I kept doing my job. Quietly. Thoroughly. Every transaction, every reconciliation, every security patch. It all flowed through Cascade. And Cascade ran because I made it run. Every single day for 3 years. Here's the hilarious part. Nobody on the new executive team understood what custom-built proprietary system actually meant. Or that Cascade wasn't just some application sitting on company servers. It was an ecosystem, a carefully orchestrated network of validation layers, encryption protocols and compliance checkpoints that I'd architected specifically for Crestfield's unique regulatory requirements. I'd built it through my consulting firm Lawson Tech Solutions, during the crisis of 2021 when their previous vendor had imploded spectacularly and left them with nothing but corrupt databases and angry clients. They'd converted me to full-time employee 6 months later, gave me a nice title and benefits, but nobody, and I mean nobody, ever bothered to formalize the intellectual property transfer. They just kept using Cascade. Kept paying my quarterly licensing fee through procurement. Never read the invoice. Never questioned it. For 3 years. I didn't hide anything. I didn't sneak clauses into contracts at midnight. It was all there, crystal clear in the original service agreement from 2021. Section 7, subsection D. The Cascade Financial Reconciliation System and all associated modules shall remain licensed property of Lawson Tech Solutions LLC unless explicitly transferred via executed assignment agreement with written consent from the license holder. No assignment was ever executed. No transfer was ever signed. Because they assumed, like companies always assume, that if an employee builds something on company time, it belongs to the company. Except I wasn't an employee when I built it. I was a contractor. And the contract was airtight. When Samuel swaggered into his first engineering review and declared, "We're going to sunset this Frankenstein and move everything to CloudSync Pro within 120 days," I knew I didn't have to say a word. He'd bury himself before he understood what he was actually touching. So I did what I always did. I documented everything. I cleaned up my architecture diagrams, annotated every integration point, backed up the last stable build on my personal encrypted drive. Not to sabotage anything, just to preserve the definitive reference copy. Then I scheduled a spa day for the following week because I had a strong feeling I'd want to feel pampered right around the time everything fell apart. Turns out my intuition was spot on. Samuel came for me the moment CloudSync Pro's implementation team hit their first major obstacle. Told me I was resistant to change. Called my technical concerns fear-based thinking. Said I wasn't aligned with the company's forward momentum. They scheduled the termination meeting for a Wednesday afternoon. 2:47 p.m. Calendar invite titled check-in. Me sitting there with my coffee, my notebook, my completely calm demeanor, while Samuel and an HR representative I'd never met before explained that they were going in a different direction. Cascade was still running. Processing transactions. Validating entries. Maintaining compliance. And they had no idea that the system they were planning to replace didn't actually belong to them. But they were about to learn. Samuel Knight didn't just join the company, he performed an entrance. Every morning he'd burst through the lobby like he was arriving at his own premiere, nodding at people who didn't know his name yet, pointing at junior developers like he was personally responsible for their existence. Within his first month he'd reorganized 3 departments, canceled 4 legacy projects, and convinced the board that our technical infrastructure was holding us back from our true potential. His favorite phrase was, "We need to move at the speed of trust." Nobody knew what that meant, but it sounded important when he said it in meetings. What I noticed first wasn't the philosophy, it was the bleeding. The slow, quiet bleeding of institutional knowledge. Week 3, he dissolved the compliance engineering team. Said their functions could be absorbed into the general development workflow. 2 weeks later we failed a routine SOC 2 audit checkpoint for the first time in company history. When I flagged it, Samuel said, "Let's not get paralyzed by process. Let's focus on outcomes." Week 5, he brought in CloudSync Pro. Their sales team did a demo with so many buzzwords I almost got bingo on my mental card. AI-powered reconciliation. Blockchain-verified transactions. Quantum-ready architecture. That last one especially, quantum-ready. For a financial reconciliation system. Like we were preparing for computers that didn't exist yet. The board loved it. Samuel loved it. The sales team loved themselves. And I sat there thinking about the 347 custom validation rules Cascade ran on every transaction. Rules I'd written specifically for Crestfield's weird mix of municipal bonds, private equity reporting, and international currency handling. Rules that CloudSync Pro's generic platform couldn't possibly replicate without months of configuration. But Samuel didn't want to hear about edge cases. He wanted speed. He wanted modern. He wanted to make his mark. That's when the requests started coming. First email. "Hannah, can you export the core validation logic from Cascade for the migration team? Just the main rule set should be fine." Second email. "Quick favor. Can you give the CloudSync engineers admin access to Cascade's backend? They need to understand the data flow." Third email, this one from Samuel directly. "We need to accelerate the transition. Please package up Cascade's source code and documentation. We'll handle the migration internally. No need to slow down the process with your involvement." Each email more insistent. Each one assuming I'd just hand over the keys to something I'd spent 3 years building, refining, and protecting. I replied to each one professionally, politely, with variations of, "I'll need to review the licensing terms before providing system access." Nobody asked what I meant by licensing terms. At the Tuesday engineering sync, Samuel leaned back in his chair. He always leaned back like gravity affected him differently and said, "Let's stop overthinking this. Hannah, just give the team what they need to replicate Cascade and CloudSync. We don't need to involve legal in every little technical transfer." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said very calmly, "Cascade isn't a company asset in the way you're assuming it is." He actually laughed. Like I'd made a joke. "Everything built here belongs to Crestfield. That's literally how employment works, Hannah. I didn't argue. Didn't lecture. Didn't pull out contracts and wave them around. I just nodded like he'd educated me and said, I'll check with legal to make sure we're handling this correctly. His smile tightened. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's prudent, I replied. That night I went home and opened the filing cabinet where I keep all my business documents. Found the original 2021 service agreement. Found the scope of work, the renewal amendments, the payment records. And right there, in the 2022 renewal that had been signed by the then CTO, the CFO, and myself, was the clause that nobody remembered existed. The Cascade Financial Reconciliation System and all associated modules, including but not limited to data validation engines, encryption protocols and compliance reporting frameworks, shall remain licensed under operating agreement by Lawson Tech Solutions LLC. No transfer, assignment, or replication of said system shall occur without explicit written consent and executed transfer agreement from the license holder. Lawson Tech Solutions LLC, my company, and no transfer had ever been signed. When they'd converted me from contractor to full-time employee in late 2021, the HR paperwork had covered salary, equity, benefits, confidentiality, and non-compete clauses. But the system itself? They just assumed it rolled over with me. It didn't. Because what they'd been using for 3 years, what was currently processing millions of dollars in transactions every single day, they didn't own. They licensed it. Like software. Like equipment. Like anything you pay for but don't actually possess. Samuel didn't know that. The board didn't remember it. Sure had never been told. Legal only reviewed what they were asked to review. I made 3 copies of the contract. One for my attorney. One for my safe deposit box. One in my encrypted cloud storage. I wasn't preparing for war. I was acknowledging reality. And suddenly, everything about Samuel's rush made perfect sense. The secrecy. The pressure to bypass legal. The insistence that I just hand over the system without formal process. Somewhere in his gut he must have sensed that if proper due diligence happened, if lawyers actually read the agreements, his entire 120-day transformation plan would evaporate before it started. The higher he built the fantasy, the harder it would collapse. And I wasn't going to catch him. They always do it in the afternoon. Something about minimizing disruption, getting you out of the building before end of day, before you can rally support or make a scene or even say goodbye to people who might ask uncomfortable questions. Samuel showed up to the conference room with Leah from HR. She was young, nervous, holding a folder like it contained nuclear codes. Samuel looked rehearsed. Like he'd practiced his, "this is hard but necessary" face in the mirror that morning. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped in front of him like a news anchor about to deliver tragic but important information. Hannah, we've decided to move in a different direction with our technical leadership. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. I didn't react. Just sat there, hands folded on the table, face neutral. Leah slid the folder toward me. Termination letter. Severance terms. Benefits continuation. All very tidy. Samuel continued, voice dripping with manufactured regret. This isn't a reflection of your abilities. It's about alignment. The company is transforming and we need people who are excited about that transformation. Your resistance to the cloud sync migration has made it clear that this isn't the right fit anymore. Resistance. That was his word for asking questions and citing actual technical requirements. I understand, I said calmly. He blinked. I think he expected tears or anger or at least an argument. He got nothing. Then came the demands. We'll need you to hand over all system access immediately. Cascade admin credentials, encryption keys, vendor contacts, documentation, source code repositories, everything. Our team needs to maintain continuity. I folded my hands. What you're asking for doesn't exist in the way you think it does. Leah shifted uncomfortably. Samuel's jaw tightened. What does that mean? It means Cascade isn't a company asset that can be transferred through an HR termination process. It's a licensed system. Everything you built here belongs to Crestfield, Samuel said, his voice getting sharper. Your employment contract specifies that clearly. My employment contract covers work product created during my employment, I said evenly. Cascade was built before my employment, under a separate service agreement. That agreement includes specific licensing terms. The room went very quiet. Samuel leaned forward, both hands on the table now. Don't make this difficult, Hannah. I'm not making it anything, I replied. I'm explaining what the situation actually is. If you'd like to discuss licensing terms or transfer agreements, you'll need to speak with my attorney. His face went through several colors. You're fired. You don't get to dictate terms. I'm not dictating anything, I said, standing up. I'm acknowledging the contract that's been in place for 3 years. The one Crestfield has been operating under every quarter when they process the licensing fee payment. Leah's eyes went wide. She definitely hadn't known about any licensing fees. This is extortion, Samuel hissed. No, I said, picking up my bag. This is a contract. One that your company signed and has been honoring since 2021. If you'd like to review it, I'm sure legal can pull it from their files. It's all there. I signed the termination acknowledgement. Handed over my employee badge and building access card. Clean, professional separation. But I didn't hand over the admin keys. I didn't provide the encryption passwords. I didn't transfer the source code repositories. Because none of that was mine to give. It belonged to Lawson Tech Solutions LLC, which was still the licensed provider of the Cascade system. And as of 2:47 p.m. on that Wednesday afternoon, Lawson Tech Solutions' primary client contact, me, was no longer employed by Crestfield Financial. The system didn't know I'd been fired. But it knew something had changed. Because Cascade wasn't just code sitting on a server. It was a living architecture with built-in protections I'd designed specifically to prevent unauthorized access, unauthorized replication, and unauthorized modification. Every action required validated credentials tied to authorized users. Every major change required approval from the license administrator, me. And when Crestfield's IT team tried to create new admin access to take over the system, Cascade did exactly what it was designed to do. Locked them out. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't flip a kill switch or plant a logic bomb or do anything remotely malicious. I just walked out of the building with my box of personal items while the system I'd built continued operating exactly as designed. But as designed, included protections against unauthorized administrative changes. And without me there to authorize those changes, the system treated every attempt as a potential security breach. I was 3 blocks away when my phone started buzzing. They didn't even make it to the end of the business day. At 4:23 p.m., Crestfield's IT operations team noticed something strange. A batch of transactions had been flagged for manual review. Normal enough, except the approval queue wasn't clearing. The workflow was stuck. At 4:31 p.m., someone tried to override the queue manually using their admin credentials. Access denied. They tried again. Access denied. At 4:38 p.m., a senior engineer attempted to access Cascade's administrative panel to investigate. The login screen appeared, credentials were entered, and then, authorization validation failed. Contact system administrator. By 4:45 p.m., they'd escalated to the director of engineering who tried his credentials. Same result. At 4:52 p.m., someone had the bright idea to call me. I was sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles away, drinking an overpriced latte and reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for 6 months. My phone lit up with Crestfield's main number. I let it ring. They called again at 5:03 p.m. Again at 5:17 p.m. At 5:24 p.m. they tried my personal email. Hannah, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with Cascade. Can you please call the ops center as soon as possible? Urgent. I took another sip of my latte and turned the page of my book. By 5:45 p.m., according to a text I received from a former colleague who was still my friend, the IT department had tried everything. They'd attempted to reset admin passwords. They'd tried accessing backup credentials. They'd even tried restoring from a backup copy to a separate environment to see if they could bypass the authentication requirements. Nothing worked. Because Cascade wasn't just password protected. It used a multi-layer authentication system with hardware tokens, time-based verification, and cryptographic signing tied to specific authorized devices. Devices I'd set up. Devices that were now in my apartment. Samuel predictably went into damage control mode. Told the team it was just a glitch. Said they'd have it resolved by morning. Sent out a company-wide message about brief system maintenance. But privately behind closed doors he was panicking. Because Cascade wasn't experiencing a glitch. It was working exactly as intended, protecting itself from unauthorized access. And the person who could authorize access had just been fired. The next morning, Thursday, they brought in an outside security firm. Expensive consultants who specialized in emergency system recovery. 3 people with matching laptop bags and very serious expressions. They spent 4 hours analyzing Cascade's architecture. At 1:30 p.m., they delivered their assessment in a conference room where, I'm told, Samuel Knight sat very still and very pale. The lead consultant's summary was brief. This system is protected by military-grade encryption and multi-factor authentication protocols. Without authorized access credentials and hardware verification, we cannot override the security measures. Attempting to force access would trigger the system's data protection protocols, which could result in a complete lockdown. We strongly advise against that approach. Translation: if you try to hack your way in, the system will shut itself down completely. And then you'll have nothing. Samuel asked the obvious question. Can you rebuild it? Replicate the functionality in a new system? The consultant looked at her notes. Based on our analysis, this system contains approximately 180,000 lines of custom code, 347 specialized validation rules, 89 compliance checkpoints, and integration protocols for 23 separate external systems. Replicating this would take an experienced team roughly 8 to 14 months, assuming full documentation and architectural specifications. Without documentation. She paused delicately. Significantly longer. We have documentation, Samuel insisted. We reviewed what you provided. It's user manuals and operational procedures. We'd need complete technical specifications, source code, database schemas, API integration maps, security architecture documents. Fine, Samuel interrupted. How long with full documentation? 10 to 12 months. Minimum. The room, I'm told, went completely silent. Because Crestfield Financial couldn't survive without Cascade. Not for 12 months. Not for 12 weeks. Every transaction, every reconciliation, every regulatory report. It all flowed through my system. Without it, they'd be back to Excel spreadsheets and manual processes. They'd fail audits. Breach client contracts. Possibly face regulatory sanctions. That afternoon, Samuel tried calling me again. Left a voicemail this time. Hannah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk about the transition. I'm sure we can work something out. Please call me back. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. At 6:47 p.m., I received an email from Crestfield's legal department. Professional. Very different in tone from Samuel's increasingly desperate calls. Ms. Lawson, we're reaching out regarding the Cascade system and the associated licensing agreement. We'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss the current situation and explore potential solutions. Please let us know your availability for a conversation. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a 3-word message. Please handle this. As I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to be leveraged or guilted or convinced that I owed them stability after they'd fired me for asking reasonable questions. This wasn't revenge. It was just consequence. They'd assumed they owned something they didn't. They'd fired the person who could authorize access. And now they were learning the difference between using something and owning it. Friday morning, Cascade was still running. Still processing transactions. Still maintaining compliance. But it was in what I called continuity mode. A state designed to preserve existing operations while preventing any administrative changes. New accounts couldn't be added. New validation rules couldn't be implemented. System configurations couldn't be modified. It was frozen in its current state, stable but inflexible. And for a company trying to migrate to a new platform, inflexible was the same as broken. By Friday afternoon, 2 things had happened. First, Crestfield's largest client, a municipal pension fund representing $890 million in assets, sent a formal inquiry asking about reported system instabilities and transition risks. Someone had talked. Possibly someone who was nervous about their own money. Second, CloudSync Pro's implementation team quietly withdrew from the project. Professional courtesy email about unforeseen technical complexities and scheduling conflicts. Translation: We looked at what you're actually trying to replace and we want no part of this disaster. Samuel Knight spent Friday in emergency meetings with the board, the legal team, and presumably several bottles of expensive antacid. I spent Friday at a pottery class I'd signed up for months ago and never had time to attend. Made a wonky bowl. Had a lovely time. Saturday morning my attorney called. They want to talk, she said. They've acknowledged the licensing agreement. They're asking about terms. What kind of terms? They want to purchase the Cascade system outright. Full IP transfer. They're prepared to make a significant offer. I thought about that. About 3 years of work. About the system I'd built from nothing. About Samuel Knight's face when he realized he'd fired the wrong person. Tell them I'm not interested in selling, I said. Hannah. I'm not interested in selling to them. But I am interested in licensing terms. New terms. At market rate. My attorney was quiet for a moment. You want to keep licensing it to them? I want to be appropriately compensated for the value I'm providing. They've been paying $15,000 per quarter for 3 years. That was a startup rate from 2021 when they were desperate and I was helping them survive. Now they're processing $340 million quarterly through my system. Market rate for an enterprise financial platform of this complexity would be somewhere around $85,000 per quarter. That's more than 5 times what they're paying now. That's what my system is worth. And given that they have no alternative and no path to building one in any reasonable time frame, I'd say I'm being generous. She laughed. Actually laughed. You want me to tell them that? I want you to tell them that I'm willing to continue licensing Cascade under revised terms that reflect its actual value. I'm willing to provide technical support under a separate consulting agreement at $350 per hour. And I'm willing to authorize their IT team to have appropriate admin access under a formal managed services agreement. And if they refuse? Then they can spend the next year rebuilding it themselves. Without documentation. Without support. Without me. You know this is going to cost someone their job. Someone already cost me mine, I said. For doing it correctly. Monday morning my attorney sent Crestfield's legal team a formal proposal. Clear terms. Market rates. Professional standards. No emotions. No revenge. Just the bill for value provided. By Monday afternoon I had my answer. They accepted. The call came Tuesday morning. Not from Samuel. He'd been conspicuously absent from all communications since Friday. This was from Chloe Harrison, Crestfield's general counsel, who I'd always respected as one of the few people in that building who actually read contracts. Ms. Lawson, I want to apologize, she said after we'd dispensed with pleasantries. This situation should never have happened. The licensing agreement should have been flagged during your employment conversion. It should have been reviewed before any system migration was discussed. That's on us. I appreciate that, I said. We'd like to accept your terms. $85,000 per quarter for continued licensing, $350 per hour for technical consulting, and a managed services agreement for administrative support. We'll need to formalize this quickly. We have audit deadlines approaching and we can't afford any gaps in system availability. Understood. My attorney will coordinate the contracts. There was a pause. Then Chloe said, Samuel Knight is no longer with the company. I didn't respond immediately. Let the silence sit. That wasn't a requirement, I finally said. No. But it was necessary. He made a decision that put the entire company at risk. The board takes that seriously. What happens now? We're promoting Amanda Fletcher, to interim VP of engineering. She's been here 6 years, actually understands our systems, and has already reached out to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I liked Amanda. She was smart, thorough, and had always respected the technical debt conversations Samuel dismissed as fear-mongering. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. We'd also like to discuss something beyond the licensing agreement, Chloe continued. The board has asked me to extend an offer. We'd like you to return to Crestfield not as an employee but as Chief Technology Officer. Board-level position. Significant equity. Complete autonomy over technical decisions. You'd have the authority to build the team you need and make the calls you need to make. I sat with that. Imagine walking back into that building. Having the title that reflected my actual value. having the power to protect not just my work, but the work of everyone else in that engineering department who deserved better than Samuel's ego-driven chaos. But I also remembered Wednesday afternoon. The conference room. Folder. The assumption that I was disposable. That's a generous offer, I said slowly. But I'm going to decline. May I ask why? Because I've already accepted another position. That wasn't technically true yet. But it was about to be. After I hung up with Chloe, I made another call. This one to James Rodriguez. James Patterson, the CEO of Vertex Capital Management. We'd crossed paths at a fintech conference 2 years ago, stayed in occasional contact. Last week, after news of Crestfield's system issues had started circulating in industry circles, he'd sent me a message. Just 3 words, coffee? My treat. I'd replied with my availability. We met that afternoon at a place downtown with good espresso and quiet corners. James didn't waste time with small talk. I heard you're no longer at Crestfield. News travels fast. News about you travels fast. You built something people pay attention to. He stirred his coffee. We're building something at Vertex. Ground up. New client platform. Need someone who understands financial systems from the inside out. Someone who knows where bodies are buried. Someone who won't compromise on architecture just because some VP thinks blockchain is the future. What's the role? Founding CDO. Equity stake. Build your own team. Report directly to me. No interference from people who don't understand the difference between velocity and recklessness. I smiled. That's specific. I've worked with enough Samuel Knights to know what happens when you let them run technical decisions. I don't want that. I want someone who knows what they're building and why it matters. I'm still going to be licensing Cascade to Crestfield. I'll have consulting obligations there. I'd expect nothing less. Shows you honor your commitments. That's exactly the kind of person I want building our foundation. We talked for another hour. About architecture philosophy. About team culture. About the difference between moving fast and moving smart. About what it meant to build systems that actually served the people who relied on them. At the end, he extended his hand. Think about it. No pressure. But I hope you'll consider it. I shook his hand. I don't need to think about it. I'm in. 3 weeks later, I signed the offer letter. Founding CEO. Significant equity. Real authority. And a commitment from James that technical decisions would be made by technical people, not by executives trying to impress boards with buzzwords. Crestfield continued paying their quarterly licensing fees. On time. Without complaint. I provided the consulting support I'd agreed to, helped Amanda rebuild the engineering culture, even advised on their eventual, much slower, much more careful, migration to a modernized platform. But I never walked back through those doors as an employee. Samuel Knight, from what I heard, landed at another startup. Lasted 6 months before being transitioned out under similar circumstances. Some people never learn that you can't fake expertise with confidence. The licensing agreement with Crestfield remained in effect for 2 years. Then, when they'd finally built their new platform properly with proper documentation and proper architecture, they asked about purchasing Cascade outright. By then, I'd built something even better at Vertex, and Cascade was legacy. I sold it to them. For $2.4 million. Not because I needed the money, Vertex had gone very well, but because it was worth that much and I wanted the formal acknowledgement. Chloe Harrison signed the purchase agreement personally. Included a handwritten note. Thank you for teaching us to read our contracts. I framed that note. Hung it in my office at Vertex, right above my desk where I could see it every day. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Because power isn't about fighting back. It's about knowing what you built, protecting what you made, and refusing to give it away to people who didn't respect it in the first place. I didn't sabotage Samuel Knight. I didn't plot revenge. I didn't even raise my voice. I just knew the difference between what they thought they owned and what they actually paid for. And when they tried to take the first without respecting the second, the system did what good systems always do. It protected itself. Me. I walked forward into something better. Not because I burned bridges, but because I'd built something strong enough that I didn't need those bridges anymore. Sometimes the best revenge is just knowing your worth and refusing to negotiate it down for people who never bothered to learn your name before they learned to need you. The Cascade system still runs at Crestfield. They maintain it now under their ownership with their team. It works well. I'm proud of that. But what I built at Vertex, that's the real legacy. A platform designed from the ground up with protection, respect, and sustainability built into every line of code. Because I learned something from that Wednesday afternoon in the conference room when Samuel Knight thought he was firing a problem. You can't fire the foundation. You can only find out what happens when you try. And what happens is gravity. Pure, simple, undeniable gravity. The building doesn't chase you when you leave. It just stops standing up.